All right, let's just get started. So for those who are here, if you're comfortable turning on your video, that would be great. If you're, just because it's few of us, if you're not, that's also okay. If you kind of just prefer to be there and listen in, there is going to be a few kind of interactive components to the workshop. So I'm going to send out this Google Doc right now. And when you are, if you see other people coming in and they need access to Google Doc, and if I don't see the chat by any chance, just make sure to share the link with them so that they have access to it as well. All right, so I'm just gonna get started and share my screen with you. Okay, so here. All right, so today we're talking about hybrid practice. What does that mean, hybrid practice? So it is really, well, okay, first just to say this is kind of the fourth part of a series of lectures. So the last one of this fall, and we've talked already about community, we've talked about representation, activism, and now as a kind of last topic, I would like to talk about practice. So practice is, you know, here really referring to architectural practice. So how do we practice? How does the pandemic and the current situation change our practice? And what can students expect when they graduate? You know, how can you sort of find a framing for the situation that you're in, that you find, the kind of predicament that you find yourself in at the very moment? And so for this particular lecture, I would like to use one definition of hybrid practice, which is sort of this idea of, you know, hybrid in particular in the relationship between the virtual and the real. So hybrid sometimes means, you know, it's sort of a hybrid term itself. It kind of can mean a lot of different things. It sometimes is used to refer to kind of interdisciplinary practices. But in this particular case, it is really about how, because we're all moved on, you know, kind of online, or let's say not, usually work remotely in most cases. How can we sort of take advantage of that situation where we're in? Is there some physical elements still to our practice, and how do they work? So this is sort of the general idea. And in terms of practice, what I'm referring to as hybrid practice in particular are practices that are working on that actively. So they're definitely, in a way, everyone is hybrid right now, whether you want to or not. But you know, only some people are, let's say, deliberate or specific or thoughtful about it. So I'm sort of trying to highlight specific thoughtful approaches to the hybrid condition, and also kind of speculate with you about how that kind of hybrid thinking can help you take advantage of the situation rather than feeling potentially, you know, scared of it or negative, because it can be overwhelming at the moment, right? There's so much change and it's not how we used to doing things. So this is really about kind of reframing that and thinking about the opportunities and the ways that we can sort of learn from the situation, also for the long term. So we'll be talking about a few different types of hybrid practice. So the first mini talk is about the spaces of hybrid practice. So how, you know, what kind of spaces do architects practice in traditionally, and what kind of spaces are they in now, including virtual spaces? Then what are the mechanics of hybrid practice? So when we're talking about, you know, hybrid practice, how does it actually work? Like how, you know, behind the scenes, like what are some of the tools and some of the habits that we can use when we're doing that? And finally, the ethics of hybrid practice. You can all hear me, right? It's all good? Yeah. Just making sure that this is working. Oh, hi, Maru. All right, just making sure you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. So ethics of hybrid practice, right? What does that mean? So there are certain ways that hybrid practice can actually make it easier, and other ways harder to have a sustainable and ethical practice, and we'll talk about that. Finally, I also brought some examples for you. So, what are some interesting, successful, challenging examples at the moment? And finally, we're talking about the future of hybrid practice. So a lot to cover, and let's dive right in. So the spaces of practice. I'll start a little bit personal. So I've started my own practice at this point, Someplace Studio, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. It's sort of it's a bit vague in the beginning because it was one of these type of situations where I had a full-time job and started to work on it on the side. But I basically just collected a bunch of photos of like all the different offices and physical spaces that I've had in the past. But before I show you that, I want to just kind of show you the fantasy of what I thought that my office or kind of like the work environment will look like one day when I started architecture. I was sort of, had this idea of the studio as a beautiful space that is a refuge, as a place where I can sort of ideate and that reflects my personality. So here's an example of a friend, Simone. She's a sculptor, and she, her space reflects her sensibility, and I really admire that kind of space. And then here, an office, by Sal Gascano, built in nature, looks incredibly serene. So just another sort of dream space of architecture. But the first space that I rented looked like that. So it was a little different, and it was, but it was incredibly productive and happy. And, it was with friends, and we rented a desk, and it felt like a beginning. It felt like sort of, okay, this is where we start, and we're going to get to these other spaces at some point. And so at the same time, and you see within 3 years, I jumped around so much. This was then in New York City at the new museum, part of New Ink, which is sort of like a cultural incubator, which is incredibly great because it helped for people to connect and to, I met so many interesting local creatives who are not architects. So it was really a great way to connect. As you can see, the layout here is totally open. The desks are very small, right? There's not really a lot of personal space. It's not really about that. It's not about having that kind of dream space. It's really about communication, exchange, and actually kind of about being maybe not so focused, but about sort of meeting other people. So it's sort of a totally different paradigm from what we think of sort of this focused artist studio. And this was another space in Vienna, also sort of, kind of friend space, co-working, but really productive, kind of like foundational for our office, again, for a few months that we had rented in. And another space in Vienna also. Here you see a little upgrade. It's sort of somewhat designed by an architect. And what you start to feel when you go from space to space as a young firm, that each firm has certain characteristics, and you kind of learn from these characteristics and how people set them up, and what the details of how the coffee is being made, how the table, like look at this table detail, where how the corner of the table looks like. It's all sort of learning experiences, I think, that can maybe help you formulate what you really like and what you don't. And then there was another space in New York after New Ink on Canal Street, had a nice roof, tiny space that we rented. And my current situation, I'm on Bowery now, in a space that's called Common Practice, and it's basically a bunch of young firms kind of sharing and working together. So you might be thinking, why is that hybrid? What's interesting about that? Well, the thing is that, I think my dream has changed. So that initial dream I had, right, of that serene space that reflects me and that's going to be there, I'm not sure it's a dream yet, and it's a dream anymore. Today is going to be about a lot of questions about the future of practice. How is practice going to change? But this year was the first time when I thought maybe actually having this kind of space that isn't mine, that isn't reflecting me, but that is sort of a shared space with other people, with other firms, with people who are not my office, is actually really nice. I can actually share with other people. It becomes less about sort of me creating my bubble, my world, and having everyone who works with me around me, but it's more about sort of but it's also not me working at home, right? It's sort of a place to go to and a space of exchange, actually not too dissimilar from what you're experiencing in studio or have experienced in the past when you were in studio. And here is our Berlin office. So my business partner just this year actually moved to Berlin for project reasons, romantic reasons, and he's there now. So again, it's actually, you know, that's like his living room, but he works from there. So now you're starting to see the hybrid aspect, right? We're working from different places, different continents, completely flexible. And I choose to be in an office because I like being in an office, and maybe it's a matter of habit, but sort of you know, working from home doesn't quite work for me as well, and for him it works great, and so we have sort of the flexibility to do that. And then this summer we were in rented a house in the Adirondacks with friends, and actually worked in this space. So, and it was under renovation, and I became really interested in the space itself and took a lot of photos of it and scanned it. So again, another office space in a way for us, right? Even though it was very temporary. And of course, I could now put pictures of every airplane lobby and every train. I'm not going to do that, but you get the idea, of course. And I know everyone is kind of already working that way, but it's but this one led to an interesting, let's say, process from there because of the scan. It became, so this is the 3D scan of it, and it became incorporated into a project. And later actually became a virtual environment of collaboration for us. So see how seamless that transition was from the physical environment to the virtual environment. So suddenly we had this get together with a bunch of people and friends and colleagues to come together. So that was before the election. That's why the message is on here, to get together and talk about foam, because that's what the project was about. And you saw all this exposed foam on the interior of that space. So I scanned all these details of the space and kind of created this large landscape that we could all occupy. And so, you know, okay, we're getting maybe closer to this idea of hybrid. So it was a physical space. We were in there together working. I was the only one from my office, but you know, these boundaries are even blurred. There were other friends and colleagues who were also working in the space. And then this space here became a virtual space where also, you know, some people from my office were all there, but also other people. So it sort of becomes a really interesting kind of blending and blurring of these things. This was a space in the spring that we did an exhibition in, and actually this was scanned by students from GSAPP as part of my seminar, Tools for Show. And so using the laser scanner, and we didn't know at the time, because we didn't know COVID would happen quite yet, but it actually became very useful to have that 3D model of the space, because obviously once we all were confined to our apartments, you know, we wouldn't be able to go back and just take a photo or measure things. So it was sort of became a really useful tool. And I'll talk about that also in the mechanics of hybrid practice, because I think that scanning does have a really particular role in that. So here you see, and by the way, for those who are coming in new, there's a link to this Google Doc, so you can all come in. And all of these images have links on them. So if you, I'm not gonna go out, but if you just click on the image, it takes you to the link, and you can kind of learn more about these particular projects and so on. So here you see you know, the 3D model of that space, and it actually as part of a kind of web experience. So, you know, it became a kind of negotiation between the physical exhibition and the virtual exhibition, and kind of a reliving of that. In this case, I guess more of a reconstruction of that physical exhibition in virtual space, but also almost a preservation project. I don't know, it was sort of a reflection, but not an exact copy. And finally, another example of, so this was actually the second half of that same semester. Students took, because we were confined to our homes, basically took their offices, aka their living environments, their apartments, and scanned those and put them onto a website and shared, you know, with the other peers. So if you click on that link, there's the full, all the projects are on there. And that was really interesting. You know, it became really intimate in a way, because it was people's personal homes that you usually don't see in a class environment, but it was also their studio at that point, right? It was the kind of location of their hybrid practice at that moment. So it was a really interesting way to kind of get into people's spaces and understand them. And here, another project in the year before, also part of the seminar where we went to the Intrepid and scanned the sick bay, which is usually inaccessible to the public. But in this case, became a space where we could go in, document it, and then put it on the web. So it was more about sort of documenting the site. And what was interesting here, I guess, hybrid, was that students actually did a lot of different interventions in there. Some of them were more like exhibitions or AR interventions within the space that were specific and local. And so this model really became more of a kind of site survey, or a sort of, the virtual model itself became the site, and then also the physical space was the site. So it was, again, sort of working with documentation and scanning to think through these questions. So there are a number of virtual tools, spaces that we're using, and I am calling them spaces here. And I mean, that's something we can discuss, I think, but please write down questions and thoughts in the meantime if you have them. But I think some of them are quite obviously spaces. So hubs is actually a VR, literally a 3D space, and the foam project that I showed earlier is built-in hub. So I think that translation is quite easy to make. But even with Zoom, this summer when we did the Intro to Architecture program, we started to do the 24-hour Zoom studio, and that you could just go in at any time. And you see my terminology, I say go in means like, actually access, but I think there was a different kind of attitude towards it because it was open 24 hours. So usually a Zoom call is at a specific amount of time. You meet there, for 30 minutes with somebody and then you leave. But just having it open sort of turned it from, I would argue, a kind of meeting to a space. So I think a lot of these tools, leave a certain flexibility in terms of how they're used and how they can be kind of used as replacement for certain kind of spaces. And I think what that 24-hour thing also leaves open is that you could basically run into somebody there, right? Like if it's a whole studio and they're in there a lot, and people told me that they have. I mean, I have never, I told them that I'm not, as a teacher, I'm not going to go in there and surprise them, and it's not my time to be there. So I'm leaving them privacy in their space. But I have heard that it was used that way. And Slack and Google Docs and so on, those are maybe, I don't know if the spatial analogy works so well there, but they're definitely really fundamental for us right now, especially this year when we weren't able to come together to have that kind of feeling of connectedness and communication with each other that really goes beyond. You see that email is not on that list. And well, actually it is, which I guess was part of the G suite. So it is there, but it's really maybe the least important aspect, because email is everything else, right? It's like where you get all the information on there from so many different people. And so Slack actually is really helpful in sort of creating a specific space of communication just for our studio and nothing else, right? Nobody else has access to it. Nobody can message me on there. I'm in different Slack groups, but our Slack group is just for us. And I think that's important. Again, maybe the spatial analogy does work. That is our space only particular for us. So in that spirit, there is, a lot of discussion. So, I took you now on a wild ride from sort of physical spaces to virtual spaces to kind of digital spaces. But I think what's a big discussion, and what is my kind of first question to you, if you think of the kind of space that you're working in and that you imagine yourself in, now or one day in the near future, let's say when you graduate, or when your next step after pandemic, if you already graduated, do you imagine yourself working in an office? Do you imagine yourself working from home? And as you see, there's a whole range of opinions about, what is better, and there's different sort of directions in terms of what firms want and what people want, and also within people there's like a high degree of difference. So I mean, I kind of like already mentioned a little bit my approach, which is I really like being in an office, and it doesn't have to be my office, it has to be a office that feels right, you know, that can be with other people. But so I think that but then actually my main communication isn't in person. So that's definitely in itself a hybrid condition. But that's also something that kind of emerged, you know, through a circumstance and not necessarily, it's somewhat by design, but it's sort of both. So I'm curious to hear from you guys, and that's my first question. I'm going to reshare this for those who are maybe missing this in the chat. So please, whoops. Oh, too many windows on here. Can somebody share it in the chat? I somehow don't see it. Maybe because I'm screen sharing. Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing for a second. Okay, here it is. Okay, so here's the Google Doc again, and if everybody can just click it and go to page 24 and fill in. So basically, there's two questions. The first one is, what space have you worked in the past, and how did that make you feel? And that can also be your Columbia studio. It can be a non-architectural job, just kind of like reflecting a little bit about, you know, kind of like the way that I did looking back at all the different spaces that I've inhabited since I've started my practice. But you don't have to mention everyone, just maybe the ones that come to your mind that are that were somehow important or that you thought about. And then the second question is, you know, once school is over, what kind of space do you imagine yourself being in, and what would be sort of, what would be something you can think of it a little bit as like an ideal situation? Are you somebody who like wants to work from home, would enjoy working from home, or do you want to be in a, you know, your own private studio, or do you want to be as part of like a large community where you interact with people a lot? Do you want to be with other architects? Do you want to be with, you know, a bunch of creatives or other people? Like, it's just sort of like quick notes of like vision of where you imagine yourself in a year or two from now. And I'll give you 5 minutes or so, no, 4 minutes ish. Let's check in after 4 minutes, and yeah. And I'm going to play some music. So it should come. Okay, I think I have to share my screen again, and then it will work with the sound as well. Can you hear the audio? Okay, I'm gonna assume that's a yes. So
yes.
strange that my... Okay,
yes,
perfect.
we can hear it, Bika. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I gave you a thumbs up, but I think you don't see me. So
yeah, it's like, you know, I tried the double screen situation, but my laptop always crashes when I have like 2 screens, and so
yeah.
Okay. So good. It's gonna be 1 screen. I'm gonna switch back and forth a little bit.
Okay.
I'm just going to leave this on screen so you don't feel self-conscious seeing yourself typing. And also, comments are anonymous, so you don't need to worry. I'm not gonna, you know, think about what you, who wrote what or anything like that. Okay, I think we have some really interesting responses. Let me stop the music. So that's, you can already see that there's totally different kind of responses here. So you have, people who are like definitely want to work from home, people who are definitely not working alone, right? Some people want to be, it's interesting, very specific ideas, to 20 to 30 people, 10 people. So it's like, you can see the range of responses even within this very small sample size. And I think that's something that's really important to remember, because I think as we come out of at the moment, we're all, we lived through these two really different extremes, right? We lived through essentially a forced, let's say more or less a forced office environment where everyone was, at least in architecture, most of the time you were really supposed to be there. And if you didn't feel great, you still went, in every job I've had was definitely 5 days a week. There was no flexibility and set up to work from home. Especially if you're in junior positions, you don't have your own laptop from work. And I think it felt like too much organizational effort for the studios to actually offer that kind of flexibility. So I went in this very sudden, and school was the same way, right? There was kind of this imperative to be in studio all the time. And so I think that is something that is probably also going to change, right? Like we're going to have a different approach. And I think these very different needs of people should be taken serious, but it's also something that we have to fight for. And when you start your own practices or work for practices, is also something worth thinking about, in terms of your preference and actually fighting for. Because what will happen after the pandemic is, well, first of all, it's unclear, but one thing that I'm afraid of is that, especially bigger corporations are basically going to push for one mode and that is going to be the mode that's most profitable to them. And one thing that they have found out now is that, well, first of all, people are very productive when they work from home, so they're not any less productive than they're in the office. And it's cheaper for the employers to not have to offer an office, right? It's cheaper for people to be at home, work from home, and have to create their own environment. And so there might be in some areas a push towards that, but then there might also be, you might end up working for an architecture employer that was used to doing kind of in-person stuff for 30 years, and just because the pandemic forced everybody to work from home for a year, is not going to change their attitude. And then you might have to fight for the opposite, where you might have to kind of ask for that flexibility that maybe you now need, or that you found out that not just need, but that you found out makes you more flexible, more productive in the end. So yeah, that's just, some thoughts on that, and I think you'll find your own journey within that. But I think what's beautiful is that we don't have to take something for granted anymore as we did before, right? I think that's kind of, again, perhaps a positive outlook, but that could be a luxury of your generation, that you've encountered both. You had the in-person thing, you had the working from home thing, and now you know what you like. Where, I think when I started practicing, I had no idea, because I was always forced to be in person. So that was the default. And I didn't really know. I had figured out after a while that I actually like being at home sometimes, but that really only happened once I had my own practice. But when I was working for people, that was never really an option. So the mechanics of hybrid practice. And by the way, if you can always, I can't see you, but I can hear you. So if you want to kind of interrupt me, ask a question, you can always just say something out loud or write things in the chat, but the chat I'll only see basically after the next section. So what are some important things we have to consider, except for the space, when we talk about hybrid practice, or sort of like the next steps in practice? An important one, and I'm sure you've noticed that in the past few months, is communication, right? So there's synchronous communication, which is basically when we talk. So one-on-one communication. You talk to another person, you say something, and there's pretty much more or less an immediate response to what you said. It doesn't mean they understand what you said. It's not talking about the quality of the conversation, but it just means that there's an immediate response. And so when we're on a Zoom call with somebody on a meeting, that's also synchronous. So synchronous is not defined by it being in person or not. It's just sort of the fact where it is immediate or not. And then asynchronous is when you basically send a message and you don't expect something back right away. And then, so here there's some questions about, we get into a bit of a gray zone about how long can you wait until you hear back. So with email, there's certain rules, right? Some people expect 24 hours. Some people say 3 days. And so it depends a little bit on the person, on the situation. So asynchronous isn't necessarily always completely asynchronous because you're still expecting a response. It just isn't an immediate one. And so it can become kind of tricky to navigate this type of, how kind of response timelines. I'm sure everyone has sent out emails and just never heard back, or heard back like weeks later. And it's always such an odd experience. So I think time, when we're working remotely or in hybrid situations, time and the way that we communicate is becoming so odd and in a way, hard to understand. So when you're setting up your own practice, and by that I mean not just you starting your own office, but also when you start working somewhere, I think the most important thing is the company might or might not have this figured out, their kind of like stack of synchronous versus asynchronous organization or communication. If they're an architecture firm, they most likely haven't, sorry to say, but most people don't really think about that, even though it's really important. And so you kind of need to figure that out, and if you know the difference, you'll kind of be able to understand, and you can sort of manage those communication flows and also choose, which conversations are going to happen synchronously versus not. And that's important. Well, one, it kind of like, can sort of save you from frustration when you're waiting for a response, if you decide that something needs to happen in a synchronous way. But there's also lots of studies that basically synchronous communication, constant synchronous communication, or expectations of synchronous communication makes you a lot less productive. So think of like a totally traditional office environment before people were working on computers. Whenever you had a question, you just ask the person you reached over, and they might be deeply focused, so you're actually disturbing them from their workflow, and it actually has a negative effect. So, but when everyone's in the same room and there's no digital media, that's fine, because everyone kind of, you kind of know, you see when somebody's focusing. But when you are adding in Slack and chats and texting and so on, it actually, you don't know if the other person is deeply focused right now or not. You don't see them, right? You just send a message. And most people, I can definitely relate, right? When you get a message, you kind of want to respond. And so it becomes, something you can personally manage, is sort of this type of media. And you can also tell people that you want to be communicating with them in a certain way. Especially, when you start thinking about your office or your practice a little bit longer term in terms of how you would design it. And even with your teachers right now, right? If you have a teacher that, for example, is really used to, let's say, old school ways of communicating, you might have to kind of manage up, or you might have to explain them, how, I don't know, an email response time or something like that, that there's certain sort of expectations on that from the student body, or the other way around, right? If they only if they have a texting relationship with you or something, you might also want to say, well, don't email me the night before and expect me to like read my email at all times, stuff like that. By texting, not necessarily texting as phone texting, but email writing. And so another thing when you're working remotely or in hybrid ways is that, so one thing that's more like a personal anecdote, but I've noticed that that with my business partner, we feel less connected if we don't see each other for a long time. We talk almost every day. We definitely chat every day, but there's something missing when we don't have that physical connection. And so I think it's really important for you to design and think of ways to build trust with your peers. And now when you're in school, I don't know how many of you are doing any kind of activities to kind of connect with people that you don't see, but it's really important that you think about that and that you actually design these things. You're architects, you're designing experiences, spatial experiences, and this is actually one as well. So one that we did that I can give you as a tip, and I really recommend doing it, it's really fun, is basically if somebody's in a different city, let's say you have a peer who's, I don't know, well, he was in Berlin, I was in New York, and I lived in Berlin, so I know the city, but you know, basically we sent each other to different places. So I gave him an address and he had to go there, and he gave me an address and I had to go there. And so what that created was an immediate sense of strong connection to the place, because suddenly I had to think about Berlin. I had to think about the streets that he was walking on. So it was sort of like a spatializing of the experience, and it kind of, you know, was a fun thing. So then once we were at the respective location, we called each other and sent photos and sort of like documented the place. And this was actually a building that was in a neighborhood that I knew quite well in Berlin, but I didn't know there was an Alvar Caesar building there. And when I did some research, I found that out. So it was also, and he didn't know that that building was there. So it was sort of like a moment for us to also learn together, have kind of a mini experience together online. And you know, I feel like, and it's also something that doesn't bring you on a Zoom call. It's something that you do kind of in real life and kind of on your own, but in a shared way. So when we're talking about these kind of practices and communication styles, there's one thing that, you know, I think is really important that people mix up right now. So GSAPP right now is really, and this is part of it in a way, is trying to kind of create a hybrid method. And there are certain voices, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think, but there are people who are saying hybrid is actually the worst kind of mode because it sort of doesn't satisfy either version. Like if you know that you're working from home, then you kind of can set yourself up to work from home, and you don't need to like sometimes go, or, you know, sort of, it's basically bad for people. The argument says, and I'm not, you know, I do think that GSAPP is doing a great job. I'm not sort of saying that. I think it's more in reference to work environments. It's basically the idea that this type of hybrid office where you go in sometimes but not all the time, and where you have sort of the you're allowed to work from home, but it's not really sort of part of the DNA of the company. It can be quite problematic because, so if you're a routine person and you just need, you know, your thing that you do every single day, it can be really kind of weird to have to one day come in and then kind of adjust to other people when you're coming into meetings and the other day not. The other thing is also that, you know, if people are able to actually come in person and more, then they're going to be privileged in a company. So basically they'll get, you know, the possible bias towards promoting people who come in. So, and that could have a really huge impact. So so people who then choose to work remotely, and that does often, you know, it tends to be more likely women because they might have household chores or other reasons why they want to be at home. So it can sort of negatively bias or impact against people who are not there. And I had that experience actually teaching this semester because I felt like it was harder, and we had to put in extra work to connect with people who are not there in person. So I had students who were, you know, I was teaching in person, and then a few people who were like all over the world, and it was really challenging. I mean, you know, I did my best, but it was sort of, it has to be like consciously thought of that this is not really an ideal situation. And ideally, either everyone's remote or nobody's remote. But again, curious to hear your thoughts. I think this is something that we're discovering now and that we can debate. I mentioned earlier, 3D scanning is another sort of mechanic, like another tool that's really useful when you're working remotely. I mean, you just don't need to constantly go to site when you have a really perfect model, right? I mean, obviously in the construction phase, when you're, as an architect, we still work with space and materiality. You need somebody on site. You don't need to necessarily be on site. But for the design process, I find it really hard to design if I just have like a 2D floor plan. But if I have like a fully scanned building and an interior, then it is much easier. So I mean, this is not the other things are like really crucial, right? Like communication and so on. This is more like a luxury. And the same thing with VR. I was never really into it, and there's a whole lecture earlier on where I talk a lot about VR, so I'm not going to go into too much, but I do think I've become, you know, a quarantine believer into VR because it is just incredible how it transports you to different places. And I think for architects, there's a huge opportunity to inhabit VR, design for VR, and kind of be part of that conversation instead of just denying it or rejecting it, because I think that, we'll see. It's a technology that's always 2 years away, but I think it could be a really productive part of a remote or hybrid tool set. And finally, part of the mechanics of working remotely is sort of legal stuff. So companies all over the world are set up to be in a specific place. And of course, there's lots of leeway, and there's sort of tax-free zones, and people are registered in one place and work in a different, and so that's already all happening. But there are particular challenges when you are in some kind of hybrid mode, right? I mean, think of this summer when the Trump administration wanted to send back students who were on a visa because they didn't need to be here in person, and so they were actually required to leave, right? So, so it creates all these legal problems in a way, because so much of our legal framework is sort of based on us living and having a practice or studying in a certain place. It affects tax laws, it affects employment laws, it affects, all these things. So it can that's actually could be a really big deterrent towards practices becoming truly hybrid or remote, because it's just a lot to figure out. And there are lots of advantages, I think, to having, distributed teams, international teams. That's a real headache, especially if you're, if you're a really big office, maybe you can just hire all these consultants. But if you're a small practice and you have to kind of figure out tax code, even in my case, 2 countries, really complicated. don't recommend. But I mean, again, it becomes like a thing of, what do you want, what is important to you, and how do you structure that, and just be aware that if you are interested in having that kind of practice, it's something you have to think about and consider. All right, is everyone still here? I don't see you guys. Give me a sign of life.
Yes, we're still here.
Okay, good. Okay, I have a short section, and then there's a quick questionnaire again. So it's short, but really important. So I mentioned it earlier, the ethics of practice, right? So when we, I should say hybrid practice in particular. So how, I mean, this year has been absolutely crazy and in a way amazing in terms of exposing a lot of structural and systemic inequality, racism, and just issues. And so for you guys, right, when you come out, how are you going to address that? How is your practice going to kind of have an ethical approach, and how can the methods and the mechanics that you're using for your practice have the kind of impact you want? Easy questions for Wednesday night. But just some, I guess, graphs that I think you all probably all know, but it's just always, it's sometimes easy to forget, especially when you're in school, because school is a protected environment, and schools are, in regards to gender specifically, actually become very equal. There might even be more architecture students, female architecture students, than male architecture students at this point. But it changes drastically once you're in the profession. So once you're in the profession, and it basically becomes this ladder. The higher you go, the less women there are. So there's a much smaller percentage of architects who actually get licensed, and as you here see, like AI gold medals. I don't know. I mean, this graph is a little bit random, but I think there's like a bunch of these different, and you can look up the statistics. And you should, because it's actually alarming. I remember not too long ago that I read that in Austria, where I grew up, only 19% of licensed architects are women. 19%. I mean, this is like 2020. It's infuriating. So just something to think about, right? It's sometimes, especially when you're in education, there's lots of professors, especially at GSAPP, but the reality out there is there's still way less female professors, and there's still just way less women who are really impactful in the profession, because there's all these barriers to entry. So when you design your practice, when you think about who to hire, who to partner with, who is going to be there, those are all really important decisions. So here's a chart, and this also links to like a full PDF or a full kind of article explaining a little bit deeper this type of relationships, and again, something really something important to look at in terms of like, and this brings in another aspect. It brings in race, right? It's not just like male and female. It brings in other factors, and that is another really important topic at the moment. At the moment, in general, always, but at the moment, especially urgent and forever urgent until we find equity is, race in architecture. At the moment, there's only 0.2% of architects are Black women. I mean, this is, outrageous. So there's, and again, it's things that you all know or hopefully have heard before, picked up, but it's worth repeating in the context, I think, of hybrid practice, because some of the ways that offices seem to be going isn't necessarily supportive of these groups, and so that's why I think it's something important to think of. So one important argument within that is the argument of location. So as I mentioned before, sort of location is really important when you're thinking about your practice, right? Are you trying to be kind of a local architect, or do you want to be distributed all over the world? And that ties into these other topics of gender and also race, because when you're and also income inequality. So when you decide to have, let's say, a local New York City office, and you want everybody to come in person, of course, it means that everybody has to pay New York City rents, and you have to, pay them a kind of New York City salary, and as long as everything stays within that system, that's fine. But if you start kind of hiring people from other places, it becomes a little bit more complicated. And again, if you think of it as a hybrid practice, where some people are coming in New York City, they're able to see you, they do get an advantage of coming to the office. It starts being really unfair, because only the people who can afford to be in the city, which tend to be people who have some kind of privilege or advantages to them. So it becomes it could kind of turn the hybrid practice, which sounds kind of sexy, could actually turn in sort of a negative, or a way that actually reinforces discrimination based on location, where people are, and which people can come in and which people have to be remote. So it's, again, something it might even play out at schools right now, right? Some people are able to stay in New York at the moment, and other people are not, and so so those are all really real factors. And I think when we come out of this, we have to kind of reconsider, how are these practices being formed, and who can work there, how can we sort of increase equity? I mean, the counter argument, which is also valid, is to say, well, if you have a distributed team, you're not limiting yourself to the people who are around you, who can pay the expensive rent in the centers, but you can actually hire people from anywhere, and that actually increases your reach. And we're doing that right now in our office. We actually have our first remote intern, and she's actually from Rhode Island, but right now she's in Las Vegas, and she's going to be next week in Baltimore, and she's just all over the place. And that's fine, because she's remote, and it's her decision where she wants to be, and it just wasn't really in a way, it was important for us that she was in the same time zone that we could work with in some way, although right now she's actually 2 hours earlier. So anyway, it just becomes kind of part of the DNA of your practice and what you decide. And again, now is sort of like a time to also try things out. We've never had a remote intern, and so we're like, okay, this seems to be a moment when we can see if that works at all. But these factors here that I'm talking about are all playing a part and becoming important. Okay, time for you to think a little bit again, in regards of these issues I kind of mentioned, what is a priority for you? So I know this is a big question, and you should probably, core values is a biggie. If you haven't thought about your core values, there's like lots of stuff online you can read and think about. It's a good exercise to do at some point. If you know them, write them down. If you're not sure, you can also just write something speculative that comes to your mind. If you have no idea, leave it out, but maybe, but definitely answer the question, what kind of ethics are important to you? So what kind of causes, right? Like, is it important for you, equal pay, is it important for you to be anti-discriminatory? I actually didn't even mention sustainability. That's a huge one, right? So take 3 minutes and write down some of the causes that are important for you in your practice, future practice. And I'll play you some music again. And I kind of want to repost the thing in case somebody's missing it, but
Bika, the music stopped. I don't know if that was on purpose or.
oh no, sorry, because I stopped sharing for a second. Okay, I just wanted to check in if people are. I'll reshare again. There's something weird where I can't see the chat if my screen is being shared. Okay, you can hear it again, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh. Oh, this is just the music being quiet. I was like, it stopped again. No. Yeah, that was for us a really big one when we started to not, be part of that late night culture that's part of typical of architecture offices, and it really is so deeply ingrained. And I think we hopefully, I think when you have your own office, it's kind of hard because you kind of never really stop. Even if you're socializing, you're still working. But we're pretty good. We don't work on weekends. And we tend to not work at night at studio, but of course there's all the other stuff, right? There's teaching and giving lectures and workshops at night. So it's a hard one to really, practice self-care in the profession, but it's a really important one, I would say, especially in these days.
Yeah, because for me, like what you're saying, right now, it's I'm totally fine with staying a couple of nights, approaching a deadline if you need to stay late, but just for the normal to be staying till midnight is so unhealthy, because then that means that when there's a deadline and you actually need to produce more, if the firm really needs people to be working till midnight every night, then they need to hire more people.
Right. No, I agree.
But I'm all for if you're already putting all your heart and energy into a project, and then you need to push for one more drawing to really show what you mean for a client meeting, then that's completely like acceptable, I think, to stay late before a client meeting.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think, and also I have to say, and you guys let me know how you feel about that. I'm gonna just stop sharing for a second. I have to say that some of the best nights I've had in studio, both in school and also in practice, were actually when I worked late and we're up with with my colleagues, not by myself on Zoom. I don't know how that is really for you guys, but when you're oh, hi Camille. When you're late studio nights are amazing and they're a great bonding experience, and that's not something I would want to completely miss or remove, right, from practice. But yeah, I've definitely started to feel extremely guilty asking employees to stay late, which is a good thing. I should feel really guilty. But yeah, it's it still happens. Don't worry. It like definitely happens sometimes. Yeah. Do you guys have any thoughts? I mean, there's some more. There's basically lots of really cool examples, and then I realized we're like already for an hour, so we can just keep talking, and I can keep talking about the cool kind of hybrid studio examples. But there's also, I mean, there's basically a brief chapter. Maybe I'll do that first and then talk about the examples, because that one is, I think, a really important one when you're thinking about the future in your practice, which is kind of some of the big future topics, right? Automation, AI, and so on, and how that could affect your practice. So maybe I'll talk about these really briefly and ask you one more question, and then we can sort of keep on going with the examples for those who still have energy. But I know it's probably been a long Zoom day for you guys. Does that sound good? Okay, cool. So the future of future practice, the future of the future. So, oh, I think the music is still going. Let me just stop that. Okay. So a big question, when we look towards the future, and something that a little bit like virtual reality is the technology that's always 2 years away, or that is going to impact everything very, very soon, is AI and architecture. And I think around, when I was in school, around 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there was sort of this idea that very soon all of architecture is going to be replaced by AI, and we won't need urban planning anymore, and we won't need, really us as a profession anymore. And this is an AI generated urban plan, which you can kind of tell, right? You can see that this wasn't made by a human, or maybe, I don't know, it's sort of, it's ambiguous, but it is, again, linked to this. There's a paper by a PhD at Harvard University who wrote this really extensive paper about AI and architecture, and kind of tried to quantify architecture into sort of aesthetic informal categories, and then performative categories, and came up with these variations, kind of like endless variations of floor plans. Oops, it's just linking to that. So here's some of the, sorry, I think I have to, okay. So here's some of the studies that he made, where he used GAN algorithms, which are basically, when you see those fake faces of celebrities, it's actually the same kind of machine learning algorithm that kind of takes a data set, a sample set of architecture, and then creates new architectures out of it. And I've seen, there's been like, maybe 2 years ago, a lot of architects, because it's basically, in the end, it's like any other algorithm you can run, you give it a data set, and then it kind of learns from it. So it's, well, I haven't used it, so I can't say it's not easy, it's not hard to use, but people in schools figured out within a semester how to use it and to generate new architectures out of it, sort of fantasy architectures, but they weren't really able to put in real parameters, where it ended up being kind of an aesthetic exercise. Like this one kind of looks aesthetic too, in terms of like just generating new form, almost like the very early 90s experiments when people were creating new forms. out of, algorithms at the time as well. So, but I guess what I'm saying here is it's one of these a little bit unknowns in terms of where AI will really go into architecture. But I think in the way it's used here as a way to generate design is probably the least likely that it will be used. I think it's going to be much more likely that it'll be used in research, basically trying to all the kind of menial tasks that are part of your day, even the way that you're using Rhino or drawing Rhino, making drawings of ideas. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of that, and architecture will definitely be affected by machine learning and AI. The question is how soon, right, and how much of your reality and my reality is going to be impacted by that. But it's funny when you think of when you think about automation, which is tied in with AI. Architects are like, we don't have that problem. So there's all these articles sort of saying, well, all the jobs are going to be automated. 2 years ago, 2018 was I think the year where every major institution had an exhibition about the robots are coming, and there were all these books, and there's basically hysteria or anxiety about like automation. But architecture actually had one of the lowest replacement rates, 1.8% replacement rate, almost nothing, along with like curators. So like I'm in a good position here. Choreographers, anthropologists. But anyway, it's sort of like, okay, architecture, supposedly can't be automated. I mean, I think it's probably a little naive to just claim that. Again, it's part of the professions are going to be automated. And I think when people think of architecture, often they think of only the creative parts, but there's like a lot of other parts that are definitely going to fall away. And I think that brings us into a little bit of a bigger discussion in terms of, let's say in an ideal world, we only go to the office and spend 2 hours making something creatively amazing, and we don't have to do any of the email writing and press stuff and whatever, invoices and other things that architects do at the moment, or at least not, depends a little bit on your role in the studio, but it's definitely part of an architecture office. So imagine you can get rid of all that. So the classic question is, so what do we do with all that leisure time? Where does that go? Oh, this is not the right slide for that. This actually is not. But so the question is, if that would be, again, architecture doesn't seem to be in danger in itself, but like if society would increasingly basically more and more jobs will get lost by automation, would universal basic income be a way to basically make society still work, right? So people wouldn't necessarily have that much work, but they would be able to survive on a kind of state-generated income. And this is absolutely right. This is a highly political idea, and we're kind of leaving the realm of architecture, but it's not even necessarily a left or right ideology. There's basically proponents of that idea on both sides. And I want to bring it here more as a provocative idea for your practice, because I think so much of discourse that we have in architecture about practice is so, of course, tied to clients, to ideas of, current practice as it is, and also the capitalist system as we experience it. And, you can make arguments either way, but I mean, I think with Corona, we saw that capitalism as we know it is sort of, if not imploding, it's definitely changing, right? So many people are out of work. Basically, kind of one form of that universal basic income is already happening through state support and bailouts, and everyone is getting kind of, supported by the state at the moment. So basically, it doesn't matter even what kind of political spectrum you're on. It's just like a fact that otherwise society would basically stop functioning. So in that spirit, I'm not even trying to necessarily defend universal basic income here. It could be a different mode, but I do think that that idea that was scribbled onto a Hong Kong subway a few months ago is we can't return to normal because the normal that we had was precisely the problem. I think it sounds kind of negative, but it's actually, to me, it's an optimistic quote. It's like the idea of, well, we have to reinvent our practice. We have to reinvent our financial systems. We have to reinvent how architecture plays a role within these systems. And so, again, another easy question, but so how, what are some possible changes in your eyes that could happen to the architectural profession post-pandemic in a kind of, let's say if you just extract if you think of, let's say, optimistic ways or positive impact of how the profession could change. So if you wouldn't have to, let's say, worry about surviving, and you could start your own practice because you have your basic income and you can build off of that, right? So somebody earlier wrote, I hope I don't have to work for things that I don't ethically support. So let's say that's not a question for you. You are just by default supported, and you can sort of shape your own image and practice. So I know this is a really open-ended, maybe difficult question, but what are some possible kind of changes or visions that you can see? And we can also just discuss this. It doesn't need to be just writing, but I know that some people would prefer to write, so I'm going to. So let's take like a few minutes to write and then have a discussion. And so all the way down on page 58, there's a bunch of examples, but I wanted to kind of, while people are still alert, go to that question, and then we can return to some of the examples and talk about them. I'm going to use some music again. Oops. Oh, maybe that question was too big. No, okay, some people are writing. Okay. I guess another way to ask a question is like, if you could automate part of your profession, what part would you want to automate? Or if you could use AI to kind of solve any problems for you, what would be something that you would give over that you wouldn't want to do? Like, it's almost like a question like, which part of architecture practices would you handpick for yourself, right? And which part would you remove? In a way, maybe that's an easier way to reframe the question. Okay, I think people are tired of writing. I know it's been a long day. I'm going to just stop sharing and go into discussion mode. Okay, there's a few people here. So yeah, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on these things. I mean, I think that with automation and AI and all these things, I mean, it's yeah, maybe it's too mind-boggling at the moment to think of that, or it's too far away.
I think if I would automate something, it would be all the administrative parts and have a maximum amount of time to actually iterate until you find the best possible solution design, which I feel we're always running against time and running against other things that have to be taken care of.
Yeah, totally.
I'll think about a software in between Rhino and Revit that you can actually play with masses, but the masses will translate into drawings, will poche itself. Rhino kind of does that, but it's very sloppy with it, so that you can produce all the required drawings automatically as you design, so you don't spend time on repeating the same task over and over.
Yeah, I agree that actually, it's funny we talk about AI, but actually the tools that we're using are so far from ideal still. It's kind of crazy that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I like Rhino, it's definitely a good software in many ways, but it falls so short in terms of so many ways, what we would really need. If you could just fantasize about your ideal software, it would be a totally different thing, I think, you know, and like you're saying. And Revit, I mean, I never learned Revit because it's too, I can't. I know you guys have to do it in school, right? It's like part of the second year or something.
Yeah. But some people design their studio projects on Revit. I mean, not that many, but some people do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a dream for me of practice, hybrid practice. If I could invent my own tools, I tried to do it and it's so hard. I basically failed, and I'm like, you know, back to just trying to find what's out there and use what other people are building, because you know, designing software is hard. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be dreaming of it and requesting it, right? And thinking what's possible, and also thinking what the parts that we don't want to do, because in the end, you know, the things that you know how to do are gonna limit how far you can think. And so it's sort of a, yeah, sometimes, you know, you have to kind of switch that and just fantasize about stuff. And then I think, but once you're also looking out for that, so for example, Mozilla Hubs has been around actually for a few years, but I was never even interested in looking into it. And once I got interested in VR, I started to look for easier forms to implement VR, because VR, if you think of Unity, and if you need a VR headset to use VR, I think it's absolutely uninteresting because nobody has that. But if you can use VR on the desktop and you can just access a 3D world with your friends, then I think it's incredibly interesting. And then I found that tool that actually already existed. So I think sort of like inverting that a little bit and thinking about sort of, you know, some of these fantasies of where you want to be and what you want to create in your practice can really help lead you to these things that might actually already be out there. So maybe, you know, Nicholas, maybe that tool is there. You don't know.
Yeah. Did you see the models that they did? That, well, at least 2 of the ADR students are like Nicolas and Peter were both here. Then, like, for the model assignment for ADR, there was so much VR, and I thought it was so interesting. I think you would love that assignment. Go into the Miro board and check them out.
Yeah, send it to me. I haven't seen it. Yeah, but it sounds.
Yeah. I
know they invited me to the drawing review and not to the model review. I was a little disappointed.
Oh, that's so disappointing. Because I think it's like exactly what you're interested in. Like,
right. Yeah.
Oh, the other thing I've been thinking of in this conversation is, like, in architecture offices especially, there's always some tasks that seem a bit repetitive. Like, for example, not repetitive, but like labor intensive without the necessity of them being, like tracing Google Earth things.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Instead of like being proficient in GIS and like me actually knowing how to do that. For example, or like drawing architectural details, or like that we should have an organized library on like architectural details. But then I think on the flip side, and I used to spend so long, like a couple of years ago in school, finding like scale figures that were like perfect for the drawing I was doing. But now with Dimensions Guide, you're familiar with that page, I'm guessing?
Actually, I'm not. Dimensions Guide?
It's I don't know. I mean, I'm gonna like criticize it a little, but Dimensions Guide, and it has like a bunch of scale figures like doing everything and like all the like pop culture, and it's great. But now I find myself only using Dimensions Guide scalies in all of my drawings, and now it's not like as intentional as before. So it's like also risky to have a library of all these things. Like, what if we had a super complete library of architectural details, but then we're not creative with the way we build, and it's not really evolving because we're just using the same thing over and over again. So it's like automating it or not, I'm not sure.
Right, but I guess with the AI argument, and you should read that paper if you're interested in that, the Harvard paper. Basically, he says we need to use AI not as a black box where you put something in, an input, and it comes out as something, but as a gray box. And that means that you kind of follow along with every step and actually have input or kind of control it in more detailed ways. So I do think that, you know, the way that you guys are now working with computers, previous generations would have found like you're giving up too much control to the computer, way too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a slow but definitely happening process. And yeah, I think, you know, the fact that those libraries are still not really existing in terms of like huge detailed libraries, huge or not, so, you know, again, they exist, but they're not necessarily that accessible or well organized or global. It's just still like large offices have their own archives, and then there's some attempts, but it's not really a consolidated system. So imagine you had an AI system where you could just look for, you would tell the AI, can you find me a detail, and it would just present you with 10 options of like perfect, you know, instead of you sitting and like researching zine and being like, that building kind of looks similar to what I'm doing, and maybe the detail is kind of similar, and then you don't find the detail because nobody has published it. I mean, that's how research works now in a way, right? We don't want to admit it, but it's kind of true. So instead of just describing kind of the idea, or you're filling in the images that you have, and then they come up with, you know, they take 10 iterations and then take in all the factors of climate and generate a new detail, and you basically look over it and change it manually based on the recommendation. That's pretty few. We're not that far away from that. If we, again, it's more like are we, you know, somebody would need to like actually make it and kind of build the interface. And there's this app, it's called Flux, that actually tried to do that on an urban scale. It basically allowed for like planning that brings in all the kind of metadata from an environment, and so you don't have to worry about code and any of that. And it's really interesting. I read about it recently. It's like that's kind of what I was talking about like 5 years ago. It was like everyone's like, it's going to change. Nobody's going to need urban planning architects anymore. But they just pivoted 2 years ago. They were like, we're closing the business. I don't know, they got like millions and millions in funding, and that's what happens with that kind of startups, you know, who are trying to reinvent a field, and they just disappeared, and nobody has ever picked up from them. And I don't know if they just found out that the business model isn't there, the architects are not paying enough, or no, it's not clear what happened. We'd have to kind of find them and really ask them, because the public statement's just like, the world is not ready, essentially, you know. So whatever it was, it didn't work. But yeah.
I was wondering, I watched your lecture, I don't remember if it was live or on like back in the summer, about like scanning with photogrammetry. And now with the new iPhone, they claim to have like a more advanced system to that. Have you been able to look into that? Is that real, or is there any apps that like change that are, you know, like an update to that you mentioned back then?
Well, I think reality capture is still the best option in terms of, you know, creating accurate architectural size scans. In terms of phone apps and stuff like that, I feel like it hasn't moved that much further. I mean, I think, you know, as phones become better and cameras get better, it's increasingly easier to take 3D scanning with the phone. And yeah, but I don't have like, there's not like a new app or anything new in terms of like the technology. I think it's all getting better and faster and smoother and higher resolution, stuff like that. But there's not like a fundamentally new workflow or app that I'm using. It's still the same one. Yeah.
Okay, which is, I missed that part. What's the name of the one that you use? Or
it's called Reality Capture.
Reality Capture. Okay.
I think my biggest recent discovery is that videos are the best way to scan. I used to kind of take lots and lots of photos, and I felt like I had more control when I was taking photos. But if you just walk around an object and take, you know, a 5-minute video, it's not guaranteed, but if you walk slow enough, I guess that's my tech update. It's like videos are really great for 3D scanning.
Okay, yeah, I remember I downloaded an app after that does point cloud, and I had to go over and over and over and over and over the same area. And when I put it in Rhino, it was just a bunch of dots, but I guess I didn't have enough of them, so it wasn't clear. So I
Did you use reality capture or?
don't remember. Let me see if I still have it. That was a while ago, but
You can also email me. You have my email, right? You can email me if you have any specific questions, like tech support questions.
perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I have some cool examples still for you of kind of adventurous hybrid practices, and I know it's late. I guess I'm gonna just talk through them, and then it's also going to be recorded, so if you're like too tired but if you want to stay on, I'd be very honored, and it shouldn't take too long. It's like 10 minutes more, and I think some of them might potentially be inspiring for you. Okay. So here's some examples, and obviously there's many more. Those are just some really interesting ones. So this is, that I know, or that a lot of them are actually friends and people in my network. It feels like nobody has yet written a book about these practices that I can just take from. But Space Popular, and I mentioned them in other lectures. They're kind of like the one office that I think been in every single lecture of mine in recently, but they just seem to cover a lot of different ground, and they work in physical space. And this is a Hubs exhibition that they made. So there's a link to a Hubs exhibition that they've created, and they've set up their practice already since years to work between the physical and the digital. And then they had an exhibition at the Rebek in London, and that got closed down because of the pandemic as a physical thing. And then they built this virtual exhibition in Mozilla Hubs that you can go in right now, or after this lecture, click on it and walk around. And I think it's a really interesting example in terms of this translation, even the details of like them using sort of the Photoshop transparency, what we could, because we use Photoshop and we know the reference, we know that this actually means transparency, but they used it as walls. So you kind of also see that there's sort of like a digital literacy that you need to actually understand these spaces. So maybe one of the first hybrid practices that I really understood as hybrid practices is actually a graphic design firm. They're called 2x4, and most architecture offices, I think because they're so, I'm not sure why really, but because they're so specialized in the build system, build environment, they tend to actually not be as adventurous as other kinds of practices. But 2x4 actually started off as graphic design, and then they started to incorporate more and more other disciplines and practices into their own office. So here we have so just some examples. So that they actually now are hired architects. They're making sort of branding experiences, websites, graphic design, exhibitions, all these things. And I think the kind of digital component of an experience is really part of it. And I used to work for Susan Sellers, who was like one of the principals at the Met. And I think she started me a little bit on that journey. I mean, well, I think it's always been there in many ways, but I think she kind of deepened that interest in this sort of hybrid practices, or including, when you think of like a visitor journey, an experience of how somebody accesses your building. It's not just about the moment that these days, the moment they walk into the front door and walk around, but it's even the first encounter is actually on the website. And the second encounter is how they actually find their way, how they navigate. It's Google Maps, which you don't have control of. So some things you have control of, others you don't. And then even there within the building, if it's a large building, they might use an app to actually find their way and so on. And so it's a really interesting, firm in terms of like establishing that dialogue. This is an VR artist who basically creates VR exhibitions, but is kind of taking real spaces as a basis. So this is actually a rendering of a VR exhibition, but then if you go onto the website, there's basically all these layers where you have, the real space, and then the person within the real space experiencing these shapes. And it's just very kind of taking a digital first language, something that clearly wouldn't exist in a physical space, and then kind of collaging them over realistic environments. And here he built a virtual gallery. So this is actually, let's say, a kind of museum where he's hosting other people's work. And one of the people that he's hosting is Theo Triantafylis. And I think a lot of people, which is interesting and why I'm also showing is like were architecture students at some point and then kind of went into different routes. And but they kind of use these skills to, for their artwork. Theo is super interesting also in terms of like, just check out his work in terms of media convergence, like using digital and analog media all together, kind of creating physical installations. So when you talk about mixed media, it's actually very rare to find examples where people are doing that successfully. And this screenshot doesn't do it justice, but he basically took a real environment and put in all these kind of AR, objects and animals and sounds and overlaid it with it. But all of that was actually projected within a room where people had it as a VR headset and also had a physical environment. So it's sort of like just multi-dimensional design. Here, another designer who's kind of working in real physical spaces in New York, but also just creates this sort of fantasy landscapes. So actually a very old tradition in architecture, right? To kind of work as, it used to be called paper architecture, now it's digital architecture, but it's sort of like the new kind of digital architecture maybe is hybrid architecture. And actually you might know these, this group A plus A plus A is actually recent graduates from GSAPP. They started a small practice. They were also based at the New Ink for a while, and they do, lots of work with the community, but then they, so this is a screenshot of their website. They've also started to actually design workshops and questionnaires to work with the community and help, but kind of always with a design intent. So it's really nice to see architects kind of innovate in that sense of, so what's particular about this workshop is that they actually used to do those, which is a little bit more traditional, I would say. They used to do this in person. They went to the community and asked people what they, what they needed, what they wanted. But then when COVID hit, they actually transformed these experiences into virtual experiences. So here they have a, they basically built a website that kind of recreated a kind of workshop. And this is a German firm, Studio Green Isle. Again, they come more from graphic design. One of the partners worked for Stefan Sagmeister, who is, a really great graphic designer. But they kind of expanded, similar to 2x4. They're much younger, but they sort of start to work with spatial design. And here's you just, a exhibition kind of screenshot. But for them, again, there's not so much of a boundary between the physical space, the web platform. It's all kind of like in-house and integrated within the office. And also they work between Berlin and New York, so maybe I just feel connected because they have a similar thing. Here, another New Ink practice that works with physical spaces and AR and kind of overlays them in really interesting ways. And another, so they're all kind of like, I realized that New Ink was a really good resource. Superficial Studio works mostly in virtual space, but in this case, they actually recreated a garment, a wearable, and in very realistic ways, and put it onto a virtual model, and kind of had a virtual catwalk and a virtual fashion show. So again, maybe not hybrid. This is actually more on the borderline of being digital only or digital first, but it is, it's strongly tied. It's so strongly tied to reality, or so hyper realistic. Then I think you could make an argument for it to be both. Okay, with that I'll end. And again, you can, go on all the links and look a little bit further. And again, those are practices that are, I think, mostly interesting in terms of both the way they work and the way that they produce. So sort of having that kind of native connection to the internet. But obviously, hybrid can mean lots of different things, and it doesn't have to be necessarily that formal, or but yeah, I think it's up to your generation to invent the next possible futures that are going to happen. How are you guys feeling? Are you all working from home mostly now? Is there still hybrid? Is there still in studio instruction right now?
been mostly online for me. I don't have a single class on campus.
Wow. Okay.
Just access to the workshop if I needed to, but not like actual instruction. Yeah.
Okay, somebody seems to be in school.
I'm in the makerspace,
Nice.
but I'll only come onto campus the days I have work here, really. Otherwise, I'm working at home.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that, you know, my criticism about hybrid versus remote only, or do you feel that in some ways it could be problematic? Or I mean, I know that it's probably everyone's thankful to have some in-person instruction, but yeah, curious on your thoughts on that.
I agree what you said about like how sometimes it's hard when you're like kind of stuck in the middle, and it's better like for your mindset to know, okay, I'm fully on campus or hybrid. But for example, in my case, I have to make a big model tomorrow, and I just gave up trying at home, so I can actually go to campus and build it there. I have that option in the back of my mind. And I've been to studio a few times to work, and it's nice to know that you have the option.
Yeah, I can see the pitfalls of being forced to do it in a hybrid way. I think, yeah, if you're just giving the option though, you know, you can accomplish the same thing whether you choose to do it entirely remote or hybrid, then it becomes less problematic. But I do agree it's kind of can affect your morale when you have to like when you're in the like work from home mindset, and then you're being asked to do some in-person thing, or it just becomes inconvenient for a lot of reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, my experience as a teacher was similar. You know, I kind of was excited to teach in person, but it also, I mean, in the beginning it was fine in September, but like recently it also got more anxiety inducing to even take the train. I was teaching in New Haven, and so, you know, to take the train up to New Haven, and it just sort of, at some point I was like, okay, I have to kind of, and it kind of coincided with the school also making that same decision, where I was like, okay, that doesn't feel good right now. But yeah, I mean, those are very specific conditions right now. I'm just, again, curious, you know, for the long term, if you imagine that school would become more flexible in that sense, if that'd be a good thing, and how to make it more flexible without really privileging the people who can afford and have the kind of personality to be in person, you know. I think that's something that's a hard one to crack, I think, for me.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how hybrid evolves post-pandemic, because so my studio meets hybrid once a week. So half the class is in person, half the class is online. And it's fine. Like, we all have the choice of whether being online or in person for that, like, one session a week, but it's so bad when it's both at the same time, because we need to be physically distanced, the people that are in person, and then like be on Zoom at the same time. So what ends up happening is like the 6 people in the room end up calling on Zoom, like on their phones, to be able to present. So it's, I mean, it just like doesn't work out, but I envision a way like post-pandemic where you can be in hybrid, because you can actually be sitting in a smaller room or closer to each other without a face mask, and you can present on Zoom without needing to like scream because the monitor is like on the other side of the room. So what we did for studio in the past couple of weeks has been, the people that want to meet in person can go, and like now David Benjamin split the studio in 2. So the first 2 hours it's in person, and the second 2 hours remote, and it's like pretty good.
Yeah, I did the same thing for my studio, but it's the proportion is 10 to 2, 10 in person, 2 remote, and that's not good. I think if you have 5-5, maybe it's better, but you know, it's sort of, yeah, I mean, you know, we're making the best out of it, and it's not like this is just a circumstance. But again, I think there's a lot we can learn for the future, and not just for school, you know, really for practices as well.
There's a good thing. I mean, well, we lose a lot of like the social aspect, which is really bad, and especially when you are doing your masters, it's very important to have access to that. But at the same time, I was in between my last class and when I connected here, I was at a Charles Renfro Zoom thing with UPenn in Philadelphia, but he was in New York. So, you know, you get all this like really easy connectivity to the world. So you get more exposure to other content, but at the same time, you're not really there. So there's like a, you know, like when people used to come to GSAPP and gave a lecture at Wood Auditorium, and you could talk to them after the presentation, but now you cannot because you're like divided by a question box on Zoom. But at the same time, for example, when I watched your first lecture, I think I was at home, and I was able to watch it without being here. It's such a weird like mix of positive and negative aspects from it, but it's good. I think maybe they do in the future classes in person, but they also record them in a way that you can actually interact. I really don't know. I mean, some hybrid might be good.
I think that the also the issue is feelings. I was thinking everyone says, oh, you can be so much more productive now that it's hybrid, you don't commute, you objectively have more time in your day. But when there's no set time for classes and all classes can be at any time, and so you have a Zoom from 9 to 11, then another from 11 to 1, and then at 1 to 3 you have something else, and then you just have, it's so overwhelming, you end up doing nothing else. And so it doesn't make sense in my calendar where do the hours go, where does my day go? I don't understand how do I eat? So I cook at the same time that I listen to a class, and then I'm not fully there, and so I feel guilty. I'm not taking advantage of the thing that I'm here for, and it's just a strange realm where I wish I was in person, but the anxiety of COVID, of course, it's very circumstantial, and it's just not, I don't really want to go to campus. But also it's maybe something in the creative field where being alone, I feel so stuck in the design process so often, and being able to just talk to people all the time, it really has a huge impact, I feel, on my projects. And so although I think it's great to be able to attend lectures from all over the world and speak to, you know, staying connected and having that active effort that's clearly there, but I just think that we have to adapt and find ways that things are more sort of a routine that's feasible in the long term.
Yeah. Well, I mean, long term, hopefully things are changing anyway, right? I think the question is really just when you go, there's no return to normal. I think, you know, I guess that's my argument, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we'll go back and it's going to be just like before, and we'll have the same kind of studios where, you know, even the best of times, I remember going in being like, oh my God, I'm gonna get the flu here. It's just like so many people, and everyone's like coughing and eating stinky food, and it's like, I mean, it's great, it's a beautiful mess, you know, but it's also like, oh my God. And I do feel like, I mean, I haven't been sick at all this fall, like, you know, in terms of like colds, flus, no, because I'm just like, but so I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, I think these like you're saying, these personal experiences right now it's just something to notice and to think about, and also push for change. And I do think that, you know, your instructors are probably grateful if they hear from you as well. I mean, especially for the spring semester, right? You can really design your spring semester now, and you can, at the beginning of the semester, I think if you request a talk, or if you're like, hey, you know, I want to kind of like talk about my experiences, I think every instructor every reasonable instructor would be happy to hear that. And and I'm happy to hear these things from you guys, you know, and it's yeah. Because I think it's hard to also understand these both sides, and the thing you said about the schedule is very true. And I mean, those grad school always had, you know, everyone had insane days always. That's not a new thing, but I do think that for me personally, 4 hours of Zoom is my limit. I can't, if people ask me for a meeting on a day when I teach but okay, teaching is also a little different. Teaching, you're like really, you know, as a student, okay, you're there for 20 minutes like on, but then you kind of check out of it. As a teacher, you have like 4 hours high intensity Zoom, and then like this is it. nothing more than that. But that's a luxury in a way, you know, to be able to schedule around that. So I think in terms of the student experience, I think that those are important points for yourself, and to take these, to kind of schedule in these breaks and to think about that as well. But yeah, I think when we return to, you know, when we have the vaccine, I think we should all figure out ways that we can have the whatever advantages of maybe not going every day, right? Maybe we can go 2-3 days a week and then engage and be there and not have these overcrowded spaces, but have like a nicer work environment. I don't know. This could be, you know, one way to deal with. I do think that the hybrid thing where some people are completely remote, I don't think that should be implemented really long term, because it creates this type of inequalities. I don't know, although there's this really interesting class now that's being taught between different schools. Have you heard about that? There's one that's like, I forgot the name of it, but there's a traditionally Black college somewhere in totally in the middle of America, and it's been co-taught with Columbia, and it's the same course. So it's like half of the students are from one, half of the students are from the other. And I think that's really integrated, right? Because you're in a seminar, so you're really collaborating. I mean, I have to talk to Justin Garrett Morris teaching it, how it went. But I think I agree that when you just go to a lecture and there's like, you know, hundreds of other people, you don't have the conversation afterwards. It's not quite sad. I'm really bad at that. Honestly, I admire you guys for going to these things. I kind of live for the moment after, you know, and then, but it's not, okay, it's not just whatever because of being a social butterfly. It's really just because it helps me pay attention and, you know, then kind of put it into context and have a discussion about it. Because if it's, you know, really just the lecture itself, sure, it can be good. And if I'm researching something, it can be very helpful to have it all online. But I think that conversation afterwards is kind of the most important thing. But then again, that's also a personal thing I've discovered, because I used to go to a lot of lectures. In COVID, I don't go to any, you know, so clearly that's something that is important for me. Other people are the other way around. They didn't go to lectures, to go to tons of them now. So again, it's a bit of a self-discovery journey, and kind of writing that down and trying to find ways where, you know, we just have a richer mode of engagement. Anyway, nice to see you guys.
It's so nice to talk with people about this and like see real examples and like think about the new hybrid.
Yeah, no, it's an ongoing conversation, and feel free to, you know, reach out to me and have virtual coffees or whatever.
I definitely think I'll email you. There's in 2 classes, I'm trying a hybrid model, and I missed. It looked like on the 30th, September 30th, you had a modeling specific lecture. Is there a recording of that available?
Yeah, there's recordings. I'm going to basically now make a document where I put in all the links of the Google Slides and all the video lectures, and so you guys can access these. And I'm going to ask Danielle to just send it to the students, because yeah, I understand it's sometimes.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, have a good one. And I'll be teaching next spring, so, you know, maybe see some of you.
Nice.
Good. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.